The rain hammered against the windshield with a violence that matched the terror in Jessica Martinez's chest. Her hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white against the leather as she took another sharp turn down the winding mountain road. The GPS had died 20 minutes ago. The cell towers were non-existent up here, and the black SUV that had been following her since Denver was nowhere to be seen. At least she hoped it wasn't. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days. She had been running for 3 days, ever since she overheard the conversation in the parking garage, beneath her company's headquarters. The conversation that revealed someone wanted her dead, and they were willing to pay $500,000 to make it happen. Someone close to her, someone she trusted, had put a price on her head. The betrayal cut deeper than the fear, though both threatened to consume her entirely. The irony wasn't lost on her. Jessica Martinez, CEO of TechVision Industries, a woman who commanded boardrooms and made decisions that affected thousands of employees, was now fleeing through the Colorado mountains like a common criminal. Her usually pristine business attire was wrinkled and stained, her designer heels long since abandoned for the running shoes she kept in her car for the gym she never had time to visit. The tire blew without warning. The explosion echoed through the canyon like a gunshot, and for a terrifying moment, Jessica thought they had found her. The car lurched violently to the right, the steering wheel fighting her grip as she struggled to maintain control. The vehicle skidded across the wet asphalt, tires screaming against the pavement as she fought to keep it from plunging over the guardrail into the ravine below. When the car finally came to rest on the shoulder, Jessica's heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as she looked around wildly, expecting to see armed men emerging from the tree line. But there was nothing. Just rain, mountains, and the hiss of air escaping from her shredded front tire. She sat there for a full minute, trying to calm herself, trying to think. The spare tire was in the trunk. She knew that much. But changing a tire on a mountain road in a thunderstorm, while potentially being hunted by professional killers, seemed like the kind of thing that happened to other people. People in movies, not to her. Jessica had built her company from nothing. She had started TechVision in her garage 12 years ago with nothing but a laptop, a revolutionary software idea, and enough determination to power a small city. She had faced down venture capitalists who told her a woman her age couldn't possibly understand technology, had survived hostile takeover attempts, had navigated corporate espionage and patent wars that would have destroyed lesser companies. She was not the kind of person who fell apart in a crisis. But this was different. This was life and death, and all her corporate experience meant nothing when faced with the simple mechanical reality of a blown tire on a deserted mountain road. She pulled out her phone, knowing it was useless but checking anyway. No signal. The screen showed her location as a blank void, somewhere in the middle of nowhere between Denver and Salt Lake City. She had been driving aimlessly, taking random exits and doubling back on herself, trying to shake any potential tail. Now she was paying the price for her paranoia. The rain showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse, turning the narrow mountain road into a river. She could barely see 50 feet in either direction through the downpour. Lightning illuminated the sky in violent flashes, followed by thunder that echoed off the canyon walls like the sound of the world ending. Jessica opened the car door and immediately regretted it. The wind-driven rain hit her like a slap, soaking through her silk blouse in seconds. She slammed the door shut and sat back, shivering. Her hair, usually styled to perfection for board meetings and press conferences, hung in wet strands around. Her face, her makeup, what little remained after 3 days of running, was now completely gone. She looked at herself in the rearview mirror, and barely recognized the woman staring back. The confident CEO who had graced the cover of Fortune magazine just 6 months ago was nowhere to be found. In her place was someone who looked haunted, desperate, lost. Someone who had been stripped of everything that defined her and left with nothing but fear. The sound of an approaching engine made her freeze. Through the rain-blurred windshield, she could see headlights approaching from the direction she had come. Her first instinct was to duck down, to hide, to pray that whoever it was would drive past without noticing her disabled vehicle. But the car slowed as it approached, and Jessica's heart sank as she realized she was about to have company, whether she wanted it or not. The vehicle that pulled up behind her was an old pickup truck, forest green with patches of rust along the wheel. Wells and a cracked rear window held together with duct tape. Not the kind of vehicle she would have expected professional killers to drive, but then again, maybe that was the point. Maybe they had traded their black SUVs for something more inconspicuous. A man got out of the truck, and Jessica held her breath. He was tall and lean, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans that had seen better days. A baseball cap was pulled low over his eyes, and he moved with the confident gait of someone accustomed to physical work. He approached her car slowly, hands visible, and knocked gently on her window. Jessica stared at him through the glass, her finger hovering over the door lock button. Everything about the situation screamed danger. A woman alone on a deserted road, a stranger approaching in the middle of a storm. But something about his posture, the way he kept his hands where she could see them, the patient way he waited for her to respond, made her hesitate. He knocked again, louder this time to be heard over the rain, and gestured toward her flat tire. When she still didn't respond, he took a step back and called out, his voice barely audible through the storm. "Hey, are you okay in there? Looks like you could use some help." There was something in his voice, a genuine concern that penetrated through her paranoia. Jessica had spent years learning to read people, to detect deception and manipulation. In boardrooms full of sharks. It was a skill that had served her well in business, and now it might save her life. This man, whoever he was, didn't sound like a threat. He sounded like someone who had stopped to help a stranger in distress. Still, she kept the door locked as she lowered the window just a crack. "I'm fine," she called back, though they both knew it was a lie. The flat tire was obvious, and she was clearly stranded. The man smiled, and even through the rain and gathering darkness, she could see it was genuine. "Ma'am, I don't mean to intrude, but you've got a flat tire and it's fixing to storm even harder. I've got tools in my truck and some experience with this sort of thing. Be happy to help you get back on the road." Jessica studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, any hint that this was some elaborate trap. But all she saw was a man who looked tired, who had probably been driving home from work when he spotted her stranded car and decided to do the right thing. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of someone who spent time outdoors, and his hands, when he gestured toward her tire, were calloused and scarred in the way that came from honest work. "I can manage," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she knew how ridiculous they sounded. She was a CEO, not a mechanic. The closest she had come to changing a tire was watching someone else do it in a movie. The man nodded patiently. "I'm sure you can, ma'am. But it's dangerous out here, especially in this weather. Why don't you let me take a look at it? Worst case, you decide you don't want my help, and I'll be on my way." Something in his tone, the easy confidence mixed with genuine respect, made her decision. Jessica had not survived in the cutthroat world of technology by being afraid to take calculated risks. And right now, the risk of staying stranded on this mountain road seemed greater than the risk of accepting help from a stranger. She turned off the engine and opened the door, immediately regretting it as the rain soaked through her clothes. The man had already moved to the front of her car and was kneeling beside the damaged tire, examining it with the practiced eye of someone who knew what he was looking at. "Looks like you hit something sharp," he called over the sound of the storm. "Probably a piece of metal or maybe some broken glass. The tire's shot, but the rim looks okay. You got a spare?" Jessica nodded, wrapping her arms around herself in a futile attempt to stay warm. The rain was relentless, and she was already soaked to the skin. "In the trunk," she managed through chattering teeth. The man stood and wiped his hands on his jeans, though it did little good in the downpour. "I'm Mike, by the way. Mike Thompson." He extended a hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Jessica shook it. His grip was firm and warm, and there was something reassuring about this simple human contact. "Jessica," she replied, giving only her first name. Old habits from 3 days of paranoia died hard. Mike nodded and moved toward the trunk of her car. "Nice to meet you, Jessica. Let's get you back on the road before this storm gets any worse." He paused at the rear of the vehicle. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Mind if I take a look at your spare?" Jessica fumbled for her keys, her hands shaking from cold and residual fear. When she popped the trunk, Mike whistled low under his breath. The spare tire was there, along with a jack and what looked like a complete roadside emergency kit that had probably cost more than most people spent on their entire tire setup. "Well, you came prepared," Mike said with a grin. "This is some serious equipment. Let me guess, you're the type who likes to be ready for anything." If only he knew, Jessica thought. 3 days ago, she would have agreed with him. Jessica Martinez was indeed the type who planned for every contingency, who had backup plans for her backup plans. But all her preparation hadn't included a scenario where someone close to her had put a price on her head and she was forced to flee into the mountains, with nothing but the clothes on her back and whatever happened to be in her car. Mike pulled the spare tire from the trunk with practiced ease, along with the jack and tire iron. "You might want to wait in your car while I do this," he suggested. "No point in both of us getting soaked." But Jessica found herself reluctant to retreat to the safety of her vehicle. There was something oddly comforting about watching this stranger work, about the methodical way he approached the problem. In her world, problems were solved with phone calls and meetings and armies of consultants. Watching someone solve a problem with their hands, with simple tools and honest sweat, was almost hypnotic. Mike worked efficiently despite the conditions, his movements economical and sure. He positioned the jack with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before, and soon had the car lifted and the damaged tire removed. As he worked, he made casual conversation, his voice carrying easily over the sound of the rain. "You picked a heck of a night to have tire trouble," he said, wrestling the spare into position. "Where are you headed, if you don't mind me asking?" The question sent a spike of anxiety through Jessica's chest. Where was she headed? She honestly didn't know. For 3 days, her only goal had been to get as far away from Denver as possible, to put distance between herself and whoever wanted her dead. She had been driving without a destination, taking random roads and making spur-of-the-moment decisions about which direction to turn. "West," she said finally, which was at least partially true. Just west. Mike glanced up from his work, and for a moment their eyes met. There was something in his expression, a flicker of understanding that made Jessica wonder if he could see through her carefully constructed facade. But he simply nodded and returned to his work. "West is good," he said. "Lots of country out that way, room to breathe." The spare tire went on smoothly, and Mike tightened the lug nuts with quick, efficient movements. Jessica watched his hands as he worked, noting the wedding ring that caught the light from her car's hazard flashers. A married man with calloused hands and kind eyes who stopped to help strangers in the rain. The kind of person who probably had a normal life, a simple life, the kind of life that Jessica had never allowed herself to want. As Mike lowered the car back to the ground, Lightning illuminated the sky in a brilliant flash, followed immediately by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very mountains. The storm was directly overhead now, and the rain was coming down with renewed fury. "There you go," Mike said, standing and wiping his hands on a rag he had pulled from his pocket. "That should get you where you're going. Just remember, that's a temporary spare, so don't go over 50 miles an hour with it, and get yourself a proper tire as soon as you can." Jessica stared at him in amazement. In less than 20 minutes, this complete stranger had solved a problem that would have left her stranded indefinitely. Thank you," she said, and meant it more than she had meant anything in a long time. "How much do I owe you?" Mike looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Owe me? Ma'am, you don't owe me anything. Just paying it forward, you know. Someone helped me out once when I needed it, and I figured I'd do the same for the next person." The simple humanity of the gesture threatened to overwhelm Jessica's carefully maintained composure. After 3 days of running, of looking over her shoulder, of trusting no one, this man's uncomplicated kindness was almost too much to bear. She felt tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks and hoped Mike wouldn't notice. "At least let me give you something for gas," she insisted, reaching for her purse. But Mike was already shaking his head. "No need," he said firmly. "Really. Just glad I could help." He gathered his tools and moved toward his truck, then paused. "You sure you're okay to drive in this weather? It's pretty nasty out here, and these mountain roads can be tricky even in good conditions." Jessica looked around at the storm-lashed landscape, at the narrow road that disappeared into darkness in both directions. She wasn't okay. She hadn't been okay for 3 days. But she couldn't explain that to this kind stranger without revealing more than she was prepared to share. "I'll be fine," she said, the lie coming easily after so much practice. "Thank you again, Mike, really." Mike nodded and touched the brim of his cap. "Drive safe, Jessica. And remember what I said about that spare tire." He climbed into his truck and started the engine, but instead of driving away immediately, he waited. Jessica realized he was making sure her car would start, making sure she was truly okay before leaving her alone on the mountain road. The consideration of it, the simple decency, made her chest tight with emotion she couldn't afford to feel. Her car started without problems, and Mike flashed his headlights once before pulling around her and disappearing into the storm. Jessica sat in her car for a long moment, watching his taillights fade into the distance, feeling more alone than she had since this nightmare began. But something had changed during that brief encounter. For 20 minutes, she had been reminded of what normal looked like, of what it felt like to have someone help without expecting anything in return. Mike Thompson, whoever he was, had given her more than just a working tire. He had given her a glimpse of the world that existed beyond corporate boardrooms and hostile takeovers, beyond power plays and assassination plots. A world where people stopped to help strangers in the rain. Jessica pulled back onto the road slowly, mindful of Mike's warning about the spare tire. The storm was still raging, but somehow it didn't seem quite as overwhelming as it had before. She drove carefully, taking her time, no longer feeling the crushing urgency to put as much distance as possible between herself and her pursuers. As she navigated the winding mountain road, Jessica found herself thinking about Mike Thompson. There had been something about him, something beyond just his willingness to help. He had the look of a man who understood hardship, who had faced his own challenges and come through them stronger. The wedding ring on his finger suggested he wasn't alone in those challenges, and Jessica found herself wondering about his life, about the woman who had married a man kind enough to stop for strangers in a storm. The road began to descend now, winding down from the high peaks toward what her GPS had called Pine Valley before it died. Jessica had never heard of the place, but it sounded peaceful, safe. Maybe she could find a motel there, somewhere to spend the night, and figure out her Next move. 3 days of running had exhausted her both physically and emotionally, and she needed time to think, to plan, to decide what to do next. The storm began to ease as she descended, the thunder moving off into the distance and the rain settling into a steady but manageable downpour. Street lights appeared through the gloom, warm pools of yellow light that promised civilization ahead. Jessica felt some of the tension in her shoulders begin to ease as she saw the first signs of the town emerging from the darkness. Pine Valley turned out to be exactly what its name suggested, a small mountain community nestled in a valley surrounded by towering pine trees. The main street was lined with modest homes and small businesses, the kind of place where everyone probably knew everyone else and strangers were noticed immediately. Under normal circumstances, that would have made Jessica nervous. But tonight, after her encounter with Mike Thompson, the idea of being somewhere where people looked out for each other felt oddly comforting. She drove slowly through the town, noting the diner with its neon sign flickering in the rain, the gas station that looked like it had been there since the 1950s, the small motel with a vacancy sign glowing hopefully in the window. It was the kind of place that existed in a different world from the one Jessica inhabited, a world where the biggest concerns were probably things like the weather and high school football scores, not corporate espionage and assassination attempts. The motel office was warm and brightly lit, a welcome contrast to the cold darkness outside. The woman behind the desk looked to be in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a sensible bun and reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up from her paperwork as Jessica entered, taking in her bedraggled appearance with the practiced eye of someone who had seen plenty of travelers arrive in various states of distress. "Rough night to be on the road," the woman said. "Kindly, you look like you could use a warm room and a hot shower." Jessica nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the last 3 days settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. "Just for tonight," she said, then added, "maybe 2 nights," as she realized how much she needed to rest, to think, to figure out what came next. The woman smiled and pulled out her registration form. "No problem, honey. We don't get much traffic this time of year, so you'll have your pick of rooms. You want something quiet?" "Please," Jessica said, and meant it more than the woman could possibly know. As she filled out the registration form, Jessica hesitated over the name field. For 3 days, she had been using cash for everything, avoiding credit cards and anything else that could be traced back to her. But old habits were hard to break, and her hand automatically began to write Jessica Martinez before she caught herself. "Smith," she said instead, writing Jessica Smith in careful block letters. Jessica Smith. If the desk clerk noticed her hesitation, she didn't comment on it. She simply took the cash Jessica offered and handed over a key attached to a plastic tag shaped like a pine tree. "Room 12, she said, "just around the corner there. There's a vending machine by the ice maker if you need anything, and the diner across the street is open until 10 if you're hungry." Jessica thanked her and made her way to room 12, a modest but clean space with a queen bed, a small table, and a television that looked like it had been state-of-the-art sometime in the previous decade. But it was warm and dry, and most importantly, it was safe. Or at least it felt safe, which was more than Jessica had felt in 3 days. She locked the door behind her and engaged the security chain, then closed the curtains and turned on every light in the room. Only then did she allow herself to collapse onto the bed, still fully clothed and soaking wet from the rain. For the first time since overhearing that conversation in the parking garage, Jessica allowed herself to truly think about what had happened to her life. 3 days ago, she had been Jessica Martinez, CEO of TechVision Industries, a woman who commanded respect and wielded genuine power in the tech world. She had been preparing for the quarterly board meeting, reviewing financial reports and planning strategic initiatives that would shape the company's future. Now she was Jessica Smith, a woman with no past and no future, hiding in a motel room. In a town she had never heard of, dependent on the kindness of strangers just to survive. The transformation was so complete, so jarring, that she almost couldn't believe it was real. Surely she would wake up tomorrow in her penthouse apartment overlooking downtown Denver, and all of this would turn out to be some elaborate nightmare. But the ache in her muscles from sleeping in her car, the dampness of her clothes, the taste of fear that had been in her mouth for 3 days, it was all too real to be a dream. Someone wanted her dead, someone close to her, and until she figured out who and why, she was trapped in this strange half-life of constant flight and paranoia. Jessica thought about Mike Thompson, about the easy way he had solved her problem, and then disappeared back into the storm. There had been something about him that reminded her of what she had lost, of the person she used to be before corporate success had consumed her life. Once, a long time ago, she had been the kind of person who would have stopped to help a stranger. When had that changed? When had she become so focused on profit margins and market share that she had forgotten how to simply be human? The answer, she realized, was gradual. It hadn't happened overnight, but slowly, imperceptibly, as success had built upon success. And each achievement had demanded greater sacrifices. First, it had been personal time, weekends and evenings consumed by work. Then it had been relationships, friends who grew tired of canceled plans and unanswered calls, gradually drifting away. Finally, it had been pieces of herself, core values and simple human decency traded away for competitive advantage and corporate growth. Somewhere along the way, Jessica Martinez the person had disappeared, replaced by Jessica Martinez the brand, the public figure, the CEO who existed more as a symbol than as a human being. She had told herself it was worth it, that the success and power and respect she had earned justified any personal cost. But now, stripped of all the trappings of corporate success and reduced to a woman alone in a cheap motel room, she wondered if she had been lying to herself all along. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the storm seemed to be moving on. Jessica pulled off her wet clothes and wrapped herself in the rough motel bathrobe, then sat by the window and watched the rain streak down the glass. In the distance, she could see the lights of the town, warm and welcoming in the darkness. People were going about their evening routines, finishing dinner, helping kids with homework, settling in for the night with loved ones. Normal lives, simple lives, the kind of life that had never seemed appealing to Jessica, but now looked impossibly precious. She thought about Mike Thompson again, about the wedding ring on his finger and the easy confidence with which he had approached her problem. Did he go home to a wife and children? Did they gather around the dinner table and talk about their days? Did they worry about ordinary things like bills and school events, and whether it would rain for the weekend camping trip? The simplicity of it, the basic human normalcy, seemed like the greatest luxury imaginable. Jessica's phone, which had been silent since leaving Denver, suddenly buzzed with an incoming message. Her heart leaped into her throat as she grabbed it, fearing the worst, that somehow, despite all her precautions, they had found her. But when she looked at the screen, it was just a notification that she had briefly connected to a cell tower and received a backlog of messages. There were dozens of them, missed calls from her assistant, text messages from board members, emails marked urgent from her executive team. The business world had noticed her absence, and people were starting to ask questions. Jessica scrolled through them quickly, noting the progression from routine business inquiries to genuine concern for her welfare. One message stood out from the rest. It was from David Chen, her chief technology officer and the closest thing to a friend she had at TechVision. "Jess, where are you? The board is asking questions and there are rumors flying. Whatever's going on, we can figure it out together. Please call me." David had been with her since the early days of the company, back when TechVision was just an idea and a business plan written on napkins over late-night coffee sessions. If there was anyone She could trust it would be him. But trust had become a luxury she couldn't afford. Someone close to her had wanted her dead, and until she knew who, everyone was suspect. She turned off the phone and set it aside, then walked to the small mirror above the bathroom sink. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, hollow-eyed. Pale, stripped of all the polished confidence that had defined Jessica Martinez for so many years. But there was something else there too, something she hadn't seen in her reflection for a long time: humanity, vulnerability, fear. Yes, but also a kind of raw authenticity that had been missing from her life for years. Maybe, Jessica thought, this nightmare would destroy Jessica Martinez, the CEO. But maybe, just maybe, it would help her find Jessica Martinez the person again. The woman who might once have stopped to help a stranger in the rain, who might have found meaning in something beyond quarterly earnings and stock prices. The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. Everything she had worked for, everything she had built, might be gone forever. But in losing it all, she might discover something she hadn't even realized she had lost along the way. Outside, the storm continued to move through the valley, lightning illuminating the mountains in brilliant flashes before fading back into darkness. And in room 12 of the Pine Valley Motel, a woman who had forgotten how to be human slowly began to remember. Jessica woke to the sound of children's laughter drifting through the thin motel walls. Sunlight streamed through a gap in the curtains, painting golden stripes across the worn carpet. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot why she was there, and simply listened to the innocent joy of kids playing outside. It was a sound she hadn't heard in years, not really heard, and it stirred something deep in her chest that she couldn't quite name. The digital clock on the nightstand read 8:47 a.m., and Jessica realized she had slept for nearly 10 hours straight. It was the first real sleep she'd had since fleeing Denver, and her body felt both grateful and stiff from the unfamiliar bed. She sat up slowly, wincing as her muscles protested, and took stock of her situation in the harsh light of morning. Her clothes from the previous night hung over the chair where she'd draped them, still damp and wrinkled beyond salvation. In her rush to leave Denver, she had grabbed only what was in her car, which meant she had exactly one change of clothes and whatever toiletries had been in her gym bag. The woman who once had a walk-in closet, the size of most people's bedrooms, was now down to the contents of a single overnight bag. Jessica showered in the tiny motel bathroom, letting the hot water wash away 3 days of accumulated fear and exhaustion. The water pressure was weak and the temperature fluctuated wildly, but it felt like luxury after sleeping in her car for 2 nights. As she dried off with the thin motel towels, she caught sight of herself in the mirror again and was struck by how different she looked from the polished executive who had stared back at her from her bathroom mirror just 4 days ago. The woman in the motel mirror looked fragile, uncertain, but somehow more real than the carefully constructed image she had maintained for years. Her dark hair fell in natural waves without the expensive styling products she was accustomed to. And her face, free of the designer makeup that had been her daily armor, showed every emotion clearly. It was unsettling and oddly liberating at the same time. She dressed in her one clean outfit, jeans and a simple sweater that she normally wore only for weekend errands, and tried to figure out her next move. The logical part of her mind, the part that had built a tech empire through careful planning and strategic thinking, told her she needed to keep moving. Staying in one place for too long was dangerous when someone was hunting you. But another part of her, a part that had been silent for years, whispered that maybe running wasn't the answer. The diner across the street from the motel looked like it had been lifted from a Norman Rockwell painting. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, and a long counter with swivel stools faced the kitchen where Jessica could see a cook flipping pancakes on a massive griddle. The smell of bacon and coffee drew her across the parking lot, despite her better judgment about staying visible. The interior was exactly what she expected from the outside, all chrome and checkered linoleum and hand-lettered. Signs advertising the daily specials. A handful of locals occupied the booths and counter stools, men in flannel shirts and work boots who looked like they'd been coming here for decades. They glanced up as she entered, their eyes curious but not unfriendly, taking in her obvious outsider status with the polite reserve of small-town people encountering a stranger. Jessica chose a booth in the corner where she could see both the front door and the parking lot through the window. Old habits from a lifetime of corporate paranoia, though now they served a more literal purpose than simply avoiding awkward conversations with competitors or journalists. The waitress who approached her table was middle-aged with kind eyes and the efficient manner of someone who had been serving coffee and comfort food for most of her adult life. "Morning, hun," the waitress said, setting down a menu and flipping over Jessica's coffee cup to fill it from the pot she carried. "You're staying at Martha's place across the street, aren't you? Saw you come in last night during that awful storm." Jessica nodded, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee cup and inhaling the rich aroma. It was good coffee, better than she'd expected from a small-town diner. Dark and strong without the pretentious complexity of the artisanal blends she was used to. "Yes, just passing through." "Well, you picked a beautiful day for it," the waitress sighed, glancing out the window at the clear blue sky that had replaced the previous night's tempest. "After a storm like that, the mountains look like they've been washed clean. I'm Betty, by the way. Been working here about 15 years now, so if you need directions or recommendations for anything in the area, just holler." Jessica found herself smiling at the woman's casual friendliness. In her world, conversations with service people were brief and transactional, focused on efficiency rather than connection. But Betty's warmth felt genuine, uncomplicated in a way that Jessica had almost forgotten existed. "Thank you," Jessica said. "I'm Jessica." She had almost given her real last name again, the habit of a lifetime proving hard to break even when her life might depend on it. "Nice to meet you, Jessica. What can I get you for breakfast?" "The pancakes are made from scratch, and Joe back there makes the best hash browns in 3 counties. Course, I might be a little biased since I've been eating them for 15 years. Jessica ordered the pancakes and hash browns, suddenly ravenous in a way she hadn't been in months. Stress and constant motion had killed her appetite for days, but sitting in this warm, safe place with coffee that tasted like home and a waitress who treated her like a human being rather than a profit center, she felt hunger returning like an old friend. As Betty headed back to the kitchen with her order, Jessica allowed herself to really look around the diner for the first time. The walls were covered with photographs that told the story of Pine Valley over the decades. Pictures of Main Street from the 1950s when the storefronts looked different, but the mountains in the background were eternal. High school graduation photos and wedding announcements, memorial notices for longtime residents, birthday celebrations, and holiday gatherings. It was a visual history of a community that had grown and changed, but maintained its essential character through the years. One photograph in particular caught her attention. It showed a group of firefighters standing in front of a burned building, their faces streaked with soot but their expressions determined. The caption below read, "Pine Valley Volunteer Fire Department responds to Henderson Warehouse Fire, 2019. Jessica studied the faces in the photo, noting the mix of ages from teenagers to men with gray beards, all united in their commitment to protecting their neighbors. Something about the photo stirred a memory from the previous night, and Jessica found herself thinking about Mike Thompson again. There had been something about his manner, his easy competence and willingness to help, that reminded her of these firefighters. People who didn't hesitate when others needed assistance, who measured their worth, not by what they accumulated, but by what they gave. Betty returned with her breakfast, and Jessica was surprised by how good it was. The pancakes were fluffy and golden, clearly made from scratch as advertised, and the hash browns were crispy on the outside and perfectly tender within. It was simple food, prepared with care and served without pretension, and it tasted better than meals that had cost 10 times as much at the expensive restaurants where she usually conducted business. "Everything okay over here?" Betty asked, stopping by with the coffee pot to warm up Jessica's cup. "It's wonderful," Jessica said, and meant it. "Best breakfast I've had in a long time." Betty beamed with the pride of someone who took genuine satisfaction in her work. "Joe will be pleased to hear that. He's been cooking here since before I started waitressing, and he still gets excited when people appreciate his food. Most of our customers are regulars who've been eating here for years, so it's nice to get a fresh perspective." As Jessica continued eating, she became aware of the conversations happening around her. At the counter, 2 men in overalls were discussing the weather and its impact on their farming operations. In the booth behind her, a young mother was patiently helping her toddler eat while simultaneously trying to manage a phone conversation about scheduling a play date. Near the window, an elderly couple shared a newspaper in comfortable silence, occasionally pointing out items of interest to each other. It was ordinary life, the kind of everyday human interaction that Jessica had lost touch with years ago. In her world, every conversation had an agenda. Every meal was a networking opportunity. Every moment was calculated for maximum strategic advantage. But here, people simply existed together, sharing space and stories without any purpose beyond the basic human need for connection. The bell above the door chimed, and Jessica looked up to see a familiar figure entering the diner. Mike Thompson stood in the doorway for a moment, scanning the room with the casual alertness of someone checking for familiar faces. He was dressed differently than the night before, in clean jeans and a button-down shirt that suggested he was heading to work rather than just passing through. His hair was damp from a recent shower, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone in his own territory. Their eyes met across the diner, and Mike's face lit up with genuine surprise and pleasure. He raised a hand in greeting and made his way over to her booth, weaving between tables with the practiced ease of someone who knew this place well. "Well, I'll be damned," he said as he approached, his voice carrying the hint of an accent that Jessica hadn't noticed the night before. "Jessica, right? From last night up on the mountain? How's that spare tire treating you?" "It got me here safely," Jessica replied, gesturing to the window where her car was visible in the motel parking lot. "Thank you again for your help. I don't know what I would have done without it." Mike waved off her thanks with the same dismissive gesture he'd used the night before. "Just glad I could help. Mind if I sit for a minute? I've got a few minutes before I need to be at work." Jessica nodded, and Mike slid into the booth across from her. Up close, in the bright light of the diner, she could see details that had been hidden by the storm the night before. There were laugh lines around his eyes that spoke of someone who found joy in life, despite whatever hardships he'd faced. His hands, when he wrapped them around the coffee cup Betty automatically brought him, showed the calluses and small scars of someone who worked with tools for a living. "So what brings you to Pine Valley?" Mike asked, settling back in the booth with the relaxed manner of someone who had nowhere urgent to be. "Last night you seemed like you were just trying to get somewhere else, but here you are having breakfast at our finest dining establishment." There was something in his tone, a gentle teasing that suggested he was curious but not pushy, interested in her story but willing to accept whatever she chose to share. Jessica found herself torn between the caution that had kept her alive for the past 3 days and an unexpected desire to connect with this man who had shown her such uncomplicated kindness. "I needed to stop and think," she said finally, which was true as far as it went. Sometimes you reach a point where you have to figure out what comes next. Mike nodded as if this made perfect sense to him. "I know that feeling. Life has a way of throwing you curveballs when you least expect them." Sometimes the best thing you can do is find a quiet place to catch your breath and figure out your next move. Betty appeared at their table with a fresh pot of coffee and a knowing smile. "Morning, Mike? The usual?" "Just coffee today, Betty. Thanks." Mike turned back to Jessica as the waitress moved on to other tables. "Betty's been trying to fatten me up since I moved here. She thinks I'm too skinny." "How long have you lived in Pine Valley?" Jessica asked, genuinely curious about this man who had appeared in her life at exactly the moment she needed help. "About 4 years now," Mike said, his expression growing thoughtful. "Came here after some things changed in my life, needed a fresh start, and this seemed like a good place for it. Small enough that people look out for each other, but not so small that everyone knows your business." There was something in his voice, a carefully neutral tone that suggested there was more to the story than he was sharing. Jessica recognized it because she was using the same tone herself, the voice of someone who had learned to edit their history for public consumption. "Do you like it here?" she asked. Mike's smile was genuine and immediate. "I love it. It's not the kind of place I ever imagined myself living, but it's home now. The people are good, the work is honest, and there's something to be said for waking up every morning and seeing those mountains out your window. Puts things in perspective." "What kind of work do you do?" "I'm a mechanic," Mike said, and Jessica caught the slight defensiveness in his voice, as if he was used to people judging him based on his occupation. "Opened my own shop about 2 years ago. Nothing fancy, just basic auto repair and maintenance. But it's mine, and I'm good at it." Jessica thought about her own work, the complex web of technology and finance and corporate strategy that had consumed her life for over a decade. Mike's description of his job sounded refreshingly straightforward. Honest work that produced tangible results and helped people solve real problems. "That's wonderful," she said, and Mike looked surprised by the genuine warmth in her voice. "There's something to be said for work that makes a difference in people's daily lives." "You sound like you know something about work that doesn't," Mike observed, his eyes studying her face with the same careful attention he'd given her flat tire the night before. Jessica felt exposed under his gaze, as if he could see through the careful facade she'd maintained, even in her current circumstances. "I suppose I do," she admitted. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, drinking their coffee and watching the life of the diner unfold around them. Jessica noticed how many people acknowledged Mike as they passed. A nod here, a wave there, the casual greetings of a community that had accepted him as one of their own. It was the kind of belonging that couldn't be bought or negotiated, only earned through time and consistency and care. "Can I ask you something?" Mike said eventually, his voice gentle but direct. "And feel free to tell me it's none of my business, because it's not. But last night, when I found you on that mountain road, you seemed like someone who was running from something. And sitting here this morning, you still have that look." Jessica's pulse quickened, and she felt the familiar spike of adrenaline that had become her constant companion over the past few days. But when she looked into Mike's eyes, she saw only concern, not threat. Still, she couldn't afford to trust anyone, no matter how kind they seemed. "I'm just between things right now," she said carefully. "Sometimes life gets complicated, and you need time to sort it out." Mike nodded slowly. "I get that. But if you're in some kind of trouble, real trouble, there are people here who might be able to help. Sheriff Williams is a good man, honest as the day is long. And the people in this town, they don't turn their backs on someone who needs help." The offer was genuine. Jessica could hear it in his voice, but it only highlighted how impossible her situation was. How could she explain that she was running from professional killers, that someone close to her had put a price on her head, that trusting the wrong person could get her killed? The very absurdity of it would make her sound paranoid or delusional. "Thank you," she said instead. "That's very kind. But I'm fine, really." Just need a little time to figure things out. Mike didn't look entirely convinced, but he didn't push. Well, if you change your mind, or if you need anything while you're here, my shop is just down Main Street, Thompson's Auto Repair. Can't miss it. The bell above the door chimed again, and a young girl burst into the diner with the kind of energy that only children possess. She was maybe 8 or 9 years old, with strawberry blonde hair and pigtails and freckles scattered across her nose like stars. She spotted Mike immediately and ran over to their booth, launching herself into his arms with complete confidence that she would be caught. "Daddy," she said, her voice bright with excitement. "Mrs. Patterson said she might take us to the lake this weekend if the weather stays nice. Can we go, please?" Mike's face transformed when he saw the girl, all the careful reserve melting away to reveal pure, uncomplicated love. "We'll see, sweetheart. Depends on whether I can get Mrs. Henderson's car fixed by Friday. But if I can, then yes, we can go to the lake." The girl turned her attention to Jessica with the frank curiosity that children display toward strangers. "Hi," she said simply. "I'm Emma. Are you a friend of my dad's?" Jessica felt something twist in her chest as she looked at this bright, open child who clearly adored her father and expected the world to be a safe and welcoming place. "Hi, Emma. I'm Jessica. Your dad helped me with my car last night." "Daddy's really good at fixing cars," Emma said with the absolute certainty that children have about their parents' abilities. "He can fix anything that's broken." "Emma, remember what we talked about?" Mike said gently. "You're supposed to meet Mrs. Patterson at the school, not come looking for me at the diner." Emma's expression grew sheepish. "I know, but I saw you through the window and I wanted to make sure you remembered about the lake." Mike ruffled her hair affectionately. "I never forget about the important stuff, kiddo. Now scoot, before Mrs. Patterson starts to worry." Emma gave Mike another quick hug, then turned to Jessica. "It was nice to meet you, Jessica. I hope your car stays fixed." "Thank you, Emma. It was very nice to meet you too." The girl skipped out of the diner with the same energy she'd brought in, leaving a small whirlwind of motion and joy in her wake. Jessica watched her go, then turned back to Mike, who was smiling with the particular pride that parents reserve for their children. "She's beautiful," Jessica said, and meant it. "You're very lucky." "I am," Mike agreed, his voice soft with emotion. "She's the best thing that ever happened to me. Makes everything else seem manageable." Jessica felt a pang of something she couldn't quite identify. Envy, perhaps, for the simple love between father and daughter, or regret for the roads not taken in her own life, the choices that had led her to a place where she was alone and hunted instead of surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally. "How long has it been just the two of you?" she asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "It's okay," Mike said, though Jessica could see the shadow that crossed his face. Her mother died when Emma was 5, cancer. "It's been just us for the past 4 years." The simple statement carried a weight of grief and struggle that Jessica could only imagine. She thought about her own problems, the corporate intrigue and assassination attempts that had driven her to this small mountain town, and realized how petty they seemed compared to the loss of a spouse and the responsibility of raising a child. "Alone. I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was," Mike acknowledged. "Still is some days, but Emma, she keeps me grounded. Reminds me what's really important. And this town, these people, they've been amazing. When Sarah died, I didn't know how I was going to manage everything. But the whole community just stepped up. Mrs. Patterson volunteers to watch Emma after school. Betty makes sure we both eat properly. Sheriff Williams taught Emma how to ride a bike when I was too worried about her getting hurt to let go of the seat." Jessica tried to imagine what that kind of community support would feel like. In her world, weakness was exploited, vulnerability was a liability, and asking for help was seen as a failure of leadership. The idea of an entire town rallying around someone in need seemed like something from another era, or perhaps another planet entirely. "That's wonderful," she said, and realized she was crying. Not obvious tears, just a gentle dampness that she quickly wiped away, but Mike noticed. "Hey," he said softly. "Are you okay?" Jessica nodded quickly, embarrassed by her display of emotion. "Yes, sorry, it's been a long few days, and hearing about people being kind to each other. It means more than you might think." Mike studied her face with the same careful attention he'd shown her tire, as if he could diagnose what was wrong and fix it with the right tools and enough time. "Jessica," he said slowly, "I don't know what's going on in your life, and I'm not going to push you to tell me. But I want you to know that if you need help, real help, there are people here who would be willing to provide it. No questions asked, no strings attached. Sometimes life throws you a curve that you can't handle alone, and there's no shame in accepting a hand when it's offered." The kindness in his voice, the genuine concern in his eyes, nearly broke Jessica's carefully maintained composure. For 3 days, she had been running on adrenaline and fear, trusting no one and expecting betrayal from every quarter. To be offered unconditional help by a virtual stranger, to be seen as a human being in need rather than a target or a commodity, was almost more than she could bear. "Thank you," she managed to say. "That means more than you know." Mike reached across the table and briefly covered her hand with his own. His palm was warm and calloused, and the simple human contact sent a shock of recognition through Jessica's system. When was the last time someone had touched her with genuine care rather than calculation? When had she last felt connected to another person in a way that didn't involve contracts or negotiations or strategic advantage? "I have to get to work," Mike said reluctantly, glancing at his watch. "But I meant what I said. If you need anything at all, my shop is right down the street, Thompson's Auto Repair. And if you're not comfortable coming there, just ask Betty. She knows how to reach me." He stood up and placed a few bills on the table to cover his coffee, then paused. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Jessica. Whatever it is." Jessica watched him leave, noting how he stopped to chat briefly with other diners, how Betty called out a goodbye from behind the counter, how he seemed to move through the world with the easy confidence of someone who belonged. After he was gone, she sat in the booth for a long time, finishing her coffee and trying to process the unexpected encounter. Mike Thompson was a complication she hadn't anticipated. Not because he posed any threat, but because he represented something she had almost forgotten existed: genuine human kindness offered without expectation of return. In her world of corporate maneuvering and calculated relationships, such simple generosity was so rare as to be almost mythical. But it was also dangerous, this kindness. It made her want things she couldn't afford to want, made her consider options that logic told her were impossible. She couldn't stay in Pine Valley indefinitely, no matter how welcoming the people were. Eventually, her pursuers would find her, or her absence from TechVision would create its own problems, or her money would run out and she would have to surface again. Yet as she sat in the warm diner, listening to the comfortable sounds of small town life and thinking about Mike's offer of help, Jessica found herself wondering if running was really the answer. For 3 days, she had been reactive, fleeing from danger without any real plan for what came next. Maybe it was time to start thinking strategically again, to use the skills that had built her company to solve the problem of who wanted her. Dead and why? Betty appeared at her table with the coffee pot and a concerned expression. "Everything okay, hon? You look like you're wrestling with something heavy." Jessica managed a smile. "Just thinking about what comes next." "Well, whatever it is, don't forget that sometimes the best decisions are made with a full stomach and a clear head. You want some more coffee while you think?" "Actually," Jessica said, making a decision that surprised her, "I think I'd like to take a walk around town, if that's okay." Maybe see what Pine Valley has to offer. Betty's face lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who loved her hometown and enjoyed sharing it with visitors. That's a wonderful idea. Main Street has some lovely shops, and if you walk down to the end, there's a little park by the river that's just beautiful this time of year. The aspens are starting to turn, and the mountains reflect in the water like a picture postcard. Jessica paid her bill and left a generous tip, then stepped out into the crisp mountain air. The sky was a brilliant blue, unmarked by clouds, and the mountains rose around the valley like protective walls. It was the kind of day that made you believe in possibilities, in fresh starts and second chances. She walked slowly down Main Street, taking in the details that she had missed in the rain and darkness of the previous night. The storefronts were a mix of practical businesses and quaint shops that catered to the occasional tourist. A hardware store with rakes and snow shovels displayed in the window. A small bookstore with hand-lettered signs advertising local authors and coffee. A bakery that filled the street with the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls. About halfway down the block, she found Thompson's Auto Repair. The garage doors were open, and she could see Mike inside, bent over the engine of an old pickup truck, his movements efficient and sure. There was something mesmerizing about watching someone who was genuinely skilled at their craft, the way he seemed to understand the mechanical puzzle before him intuitively. Emma was there too, sitting on a stool beside a workbench apparently, doing homework while keeping her father company. The scene was so domestic, so normal, that it made Jessica's chest tight with longing for a life she had never allowed herself to want. As if sensing her presence, Mike looked up and caught sight of her through the open garage door. He straightened and wiped his hands on a rag, then walked over to where she stood on the sidewalk, taking Betty's grand tour of downtown Pine Valley. He asked with a grin. "Something like that," Jessica replied. She recommended the park by the river. "It's beautiful down there," Mike agreed, "especially this time of day. The light hits the water just right around noon." He glanced back at his work, then at Emma, who was watching them with unconcealed curiosity. "Tell you what, it's almost lunchtime anyway. Why don't Emma and I show you the way? We usually eat lunch in the park when the weather's nice." The offer was casual, friendly, the kind of thing neighbors might do for each other without thinking twice about it. But for Jessica, it represented something much more significant, the possibility of connection, of belonging somewhere, even temporarily. "I wouldn't want to intrude," she said, though she desperately wanted to accept. "You wouldn't be intruding," Mike assured her. "Would she, Emma?" The little girl shook her head vigorously. "Daddy makes the best sandwiches, and I always eat too much and need help finishing. You could help me." Jessica found herself laughing at Emma's logic. "Well, if you need help with your sandwich, how can I say no?" Mike grinned and turned back. To Emma, "Pack up your homework, kiddo. We're taking Jessica to see the park." As Emma gathered her school supplies with the focused efficiency of a child accustomed to helping her father manage their daily routine, Jessica watched the easy rhythm between father and daughter. There was love there, obvious and uncomplicated, but also partnership. Emma wasn't just along for the ride. She was an active participant in their life together, someone whose opinions mattered and whose needs were considered in every decision. "Ready," Emma announced, hopping down from her stool with her backpack slung over one shoulder. Mike locked up the garage and led them down Main Street toward the river. As they walked, Emma chattered about school and friends and the various adventures she had planned for the weekend, her voice bright with the kind of enthusiasm that only children could maintain. Jessica found herself drawn into the conversation despite herself, asking questions about Emma's favorite subjects and listening to detailed explanations of playground politics that seemed surprisingly complex for a 9-year-old. The park was everything Betty had promised and more. A small green space beside a clear mountain stream, with picnic tables scattered under towering aspens whose leaves were just beginning to show hints of gold. The mountains rose on all sides, their peaks sharp against the brilliant blue sky. And the sound of running water provided a constant soothing background music. Mike had brought a cooler from his truck, and he unpacked sandwiches, fruit, and juice boxes with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Emma claimed a picnic table under the largest aspen and began arranging their lunch with the serious attention that children brought to important tasks. "This is beautiful," Jessica said, settling onto the bench across from Emma. "I can see why you like to eat lunch here." "Daddy says the mountains help you think better," Emma said, unwrapping her sandwich with careful precision. "When I have hard homework, sometimes we come here and the answers get easier." Jessica looked at Mike, who shrugged with the slight embarrassment of someone whose parenting philosophy had been revealed. "She's not wrong," he said. "There's something about being outside, away from distractions, that helps clarify things." They ate in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the water and watching the play of light and shadow as clouds passed overhead. Jessica couldn't remember the last time she had eaten a meal outside, much less one that consisted of simple sandwiches and fruit instead of expense account cuisine designed to impress clients or close deals. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said suddenly, fixing Jessica with the direct gaze that children used when they wanted honest answers to serious questions. "Of course," Jessica replied, curious what was on the girl's mind. "Are you sad about something? You look like you might be, and Daddy always says it helps to talk about sad things instead of keeping them inside." The question, delivered with such straightforward compassion, caught Jessica off guard. In her world, people didn't ask direct questions about emotions, didn't acknowledge sadness or vulnerability except as weaknesses to be exploited. But Emma's concern was genuine, uncomplicated by agenda or calculation. "I suppose I am a little sad," Jessica admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "Sometimes grown-up life gets complicated, and it can be difficult to figure out what to do next." Emma nodded sagely, as if this made perfect sense to her. "When I get sad about Mama, Daddy says it's okay to feel bad for a while, but then you have to find something good to think about too. He says Mama would want us to be happy, even without her." The simple wisdom, delivered without pretension or self-consciousness, hit Jessica like a physical blow. Here was a child who had lost her mother, who had every reason to be bitter or angry or afraid, offering comfort to a stranger based on the healthy emotional framework her father had helped her build. Jessica looked at Mike, who was watching his daughter with the kind of pride that couldn't be faked or manufactured. He had taken his own grief and loss and somehow transformed it into strength and wisdom that he could pass on to Emma. Instead of letting tragedy break them, he had used it to build something resilient and beautiful. "That's very wise advice," Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion she couldn't quite control. "Your Mama must have been a very special person." "She was," Emma said simply. "Daddy has pictures, and he tells me stories about her so I don't forget. He says love doesn't go away just because someone can't be with you anymore." Jessica excused herself and walked to the edge of the stream, ostensibly to look at the water, but really to compose herself before she broke down completely in front of this child and her father. The kindness, the uncomplicated love, the healthy way they had processed grief and loss and come through it stronger. It was everything she had forgotten existed in the world. For years she had built her life around the accumulation of power and success, measuring her worth by quarterly earnings and market share, and the respect of competitors who would destroy her in a heartbeat if given the opportunity. She had convinced herself that this was enough, that professional achievement could substitute for human connection, that being feared was more valuable than being loved. But sitting here in this small mountain park, watching a father and daughter who had lost everything that mattered and still managed to find joy in simple pleasures, Jessica realized how hollow her existence had become. She had built an empire but lost herself in the process. She had achieved everything she thought she wanted and discovered it meant nothing when she had no one to share it with. Mike appeared beside her at the water's edge, close enough that she could feel his presence, but far enough away that she didn't feel crowded. "Emma has a way of cutting right to the heart of things," he said quietly. "Sometimes I think she's wiser than both of us combined." "She's remarkable," Jessica said, wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "You've done an incredible job with her." "Most days I feel like I'm just making it up as I go along," Mike admitted. "But she makes it easier. Kids have a way of keeping you focused on what really matters." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the water flow over smooth stones worn clean by years of current. Jessica found herself thinking about the choices that had brought her to this moment, the years of single-minded focus on professional success that had left her isolated and vulnerable when real danger finally found her. "Mike," she said suddenly, not sure where the words were coming from, but unable to stop them. "What you said earlier about people here being willing to help, did you mean that?" He turned to look at her fully, his expression serious and attentive. "Absolutely. Why?" Jessica took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to do was either the smartest or stupidest decision of her life. After 3 days of running and hiding, of trusting no one and expecting betrayal from every quarter, she was about to place her life in the hands of a stranger based on nothing more than his kindness to her and his obvious love for his daughter. "Because I think I might need that help," she said quietly. "And I'm not sure I can handle this alone anymore." Mike's expression shifted from casual concern to something much more serious as Jessica's words hung in the air between them. The sound of the stream seemed to grow louder in the silence, and Jessica could hear Emma's distant laughter as she chased butterflies near the picnic table. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal against the weight of what she was about to reveal. "What kind of help?" Mike asked quietly, his voice steady but alert. Jessica recognized the tone from her corporate days, the careful modulation people used when they sensed they were about to receive information that would change everything. Jessica looked back toward Emma, who was now attempting to balance on a fallen log with the focused determination that children brought to such challenges. The sight of the little girl, so innocent and carefree, made what Jessica was about to share feel even more dangerous. These people had welcomed her into their lives, offered her kindness and community, and now she was about to drag them into something that could destroy everything they had built. "Maybe we should talk somewhere more private," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I need to tell you, it's not something Emma should hear." Mike studied her face for a long moment, and Jessica could see him processing the implications of her request. Whatever he saw in her expression convinced him that this was serious, because he nodded and called to his daughter. "Hey, kiddo. Why don't you take your nature journal and see if you can find some new leaves for your collection? Stay where I can see you, but give Jessica and me a few minutes to talk, okay?" Emma looked up from her log balancing adventure, her expression curious, but not concerned. "Is everything okay, Daddy?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart. We just need to have a grown-up conversation for a few minutes." Emma nodded with the easy acceptance of a child who trusted her father completely and trotted off toward a grove of aspens, her small notebook clutched in her hand. Mike watched her go, then turned back to Jessica with an expression that was both patient and deeply attentive. "Okay," he said simply. "I'm listening." Jessica took a shaky breath, trying to figure out where to begin. "How did you explain to a small-town mechanic that you were the CEO of a major technology company, that someone close to you had put a contract on your life, that professional killers might be hunting you through the Colorado mountains?" The story sounded absurd even in her own head. "My name isn't just Jessica," she began, deciding that honesty was the only option now. "It's Jessica Martinez. I'm the CEO of TechVision Industries. Maybe you've heard of it?" Mike's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained carefully neutral. "The software company? The one that makes those security programs that every business uses now?" That's the one. Jessica was surprised he knew about TechVision, though she supposed even small-town mechanics had to deal with business software these days. I built that company from nothing, starting in my garage 12 years ago. It's worth about $3 billion now. Mike let out a low whistle. That's impressive. But I'm guessing you didn't flee to the mountains to tell me about your business success. Jessica almost smiled at his dry understatement. 3 days ago, I was in the parking garage under my company's headquarters in Denver. I was working late, as usual, and I was heading to my car when I heard voices. 2 men talking in the shadows between the concrete pillars. She paused, remembering the moment when her world had tilted off its axis. Even now, 3 days later, she could recall every word of that overheard conversation with crystal clarity. They were discussing a contract, she continued. $500,000 to make me disappear permanently. They talked about making it look like an accident, maybe a car crash or a hiking mishap. Something that wouldn't raise too many questions or trigger any investigations. Mike's face had gone very still, the kind of stillness that Jessica associated with people who were processing dangerous information. Did you recognize the voices? One of them, yes. David Chun, my chief technology officer. Someone I've worked with for 8 years, someone I trusted completely. The betrayal still cut deep, perhaps deeper than the fear. The other voice was unfamiliar, but professional, cold, the kind of person who discusses murder like a business transaction. Jesus, Mike breathed. What did you do? I ran, Jessica said simply. I got in my car and drove straight home, packed a bag, emptied my safe of cash, and left Denver that same night. I've been driving ever since, staying in different places each night, paying for everything in cash, trying to figure out who I can trust and what I should do next. Mike was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between Jessica and Emma, who was carefully pressing leaves between the pages of her journal. When he spoke again, his voice was measured and calm. Do you have any idea why someone would want you dead? Jessica had been asking herself the same question for 3 days, running through every possibility she could think of. TechVision is worth a lot of money, and I control the majority of the company's stock. If I died, there would be a succession crisis, maybe hostile takeover attempts. David knows our systems better than anyone. He could position himself to benefit from the chaos. Or maybe it's not about the company at all, Mike suggested. Maybe it's personal. I don't have a personal life, Jessica said, then realized how pathetic that sounded. I mean, I've been so focused on building the business that I haven't really maintained relationships outside of work. No romantic entanglements, no family disputes, no personal enemies that I know of. Mike studied her with the same careful attention he'd given her tire, as if he could diagnose the problem through close observation. So you think it's David Chun who wants you dead, but you don't know why, and you don't know who he hired to do it. That's about the size of it, Jessica confirmed. And I don't know who else at the company might be involved. David has access to everything, knows all my patterns and routines. If he's working with others, then you can't trust anyone from your old life, Mike finished. Which is why you've been running instead of going to the police. Jessica nodded, grateful that he understood the impossible position she was in. How do I prove that someone wants to kill me when the only evidence is a conversation I overheard? And how do I know that local law enforcement won't be influenced by David or whoever he's working with? TechVision has contracts with government agencies, connections with law enforcement databases. The reach is enormous. Mike was quiet again, processing the implications of what she'd told him. Jessica could see him working through the problem methodically, the same way he'd approached her mechanical difficulties the night before. It was oddly comforting to watch someone else take her crisis seriously, to treat it as a problem that could be solved rather than a paranoid delusion. Okay, he said finally. Let's say everything you've told me is true. Someone wants you dead, and you can't trust anyone from your normal life to help you. What's your plan? You can't run forever. I don't know, Jessica admitted, the words coming out in a rush of relief at finally being able to voice her uncertainty. I keep thinking I should go to the FBI or hire private security, or maybe disappear entirely and start over somewhere else. But every option seems to have fatal flaws. The FBI might be compromised if TechVision has government contracts, Mike agreed. Private security could be infiltrated or bought off. And disappearing permanently means giving up everything you've built. Jessica felt tears threatening again, overwhelmed by the impossibility of her situation. I don't know what to do, Mike. For the first time in my adult life, I'm completely out of my depth. I've always been able to solve problems through planning and resources and sheer determination, but this is different, Mike said gently. This is about life and death, and you can't approach it like a business problem. Emma's voice carried across the park as she called out to her father, excited about some discovery in her leaf collection. Mike waved to her, then turned back to Jessica with an expression that was both thoughtful and determined. I want to help you, he said quietly. But I need you to understand something first. My daughter is the most important thing in my world. Whatever we do, whatever decisions we make, her safety comes first, always. Jessica felt a surge of respect for this man who could offer assistance while still maintaining clear boundaries about what mattered most to him. It was the kind of principled stance she wished she had learned to take in her own life. I understand, she said, and I wouldn't ask you to put Emma at risk. Maybe I should just keep running, find somewhere else to hide. Running isn't a long-term solution, Mike pointed out. Eventually, you'll run out of money or make a mistake or just get unlucky. If someone really wants to find you, they will. So what do you suggest? Mike looked toward Emma, who was now attempting to climb a boulder near the stream, her face scrunched in concentration. I suggest we get some help from people who know how to handle this kind of situation. People who can't be bought or intimidated. Who did you have in mind? Sheriff Williams, for starters. I know what you said about not trusting law enforcement, but Tom Williams is as honest as they come. He's been sheriff here for 15 years, and he's never been anything but straight with people. If there's corruption or outside influence to worry about, he'll know how to handle it. Jessica felt a familiar spike of anxiety at the thought of involving more people in her situation. What if he doesn't believe me? What if he thinks I'm paranoid or delusional? Then we'll convince him, Mike said with quiet confidence. And if we can't convince him, we'll figure out another approach. But Jessica, you can't solve this alone. Whatever resources you had as a CEO, they're not accessible to you now. You need allies. People who know the territory and understand how to operate outside the corporate world. Emma came running back toward them, her journal clutched to her chest and her face bright with excitement. Daddy, look what I found. It's a leaf that's 3 different colors, and Mrs. Patterson says, those are the rarest kind. Mike examined the leaf with the serious attention that Emma's discoveries deserved, praising her observational skills and asking detailed questions about where she'd found it. Jessica watched the interaction with a mixture of admiration and longing, thinking about how different her life might have been if she'd learned to value such simple moments of connection. When Emma had been properly celebrated for her botanical success, Mike suggested that they head back to town. I want to talk to Sheriff Williams this afternoon, he told Jessica quietly as they packed up the picnic supplies. If you're comfortable with it, I think we should tell him what's going on. Jessica felt her pulse quicken at the thought of revealing her identity and situation to yet another stranger. But she also recognized that Mike was right. Running indefinitely wasn't a sustainable strategy, and she couldn't solve this problem through corporate tactics and financial resources. She needed help from people who understood how to handle genuine physical danger. Okay, she said, surprised by her own willingness to trust Mike's judgment. But can we Can we ease into it? Maybe start with something less dramatic then. Hello, Sheriff. I'm a billionaire CEO, and someone's trying to kill me? Mike grinned, the first genuinely amused expression she'd seen from him since she'd begun her story. I think we can manage a more subtle approach than that. The walk back to town gave Jessica time to observe Pine Valley with new eyes. What she had initially seen as a quaint small town now looked like something more significant. A community that functioned on principles of mutual support and genuine care for its members. People nodded and waved as they passed, not with the calculated networking energy she was used to, but with simple friendliness. Children played in yards while parents worked in gardens or chatted with neighbors over fence lines. It was the kind of place where unusual events would be noticed, but where strangers were given the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise. The sheriff's office was located in a small building on a side street off Main, sharing space with the volunteer fire department and what appeared to be the town's emergency management services. The American flag out front snapped in the mountain breeze, and the building itself looked like it had been built in the 1960s and maintained with careful pride ever since. Mike suggested that Emma wait in the truck with her homework while he and Jessica spoke with Sheriff Williams. Emma agreed cheerfully, settling into the passenger seat with her backpack and the juice box Mike had saved from lunch. Jessica marveled again at the trust between father and daughter, the way Emma simply accepted that her father would handle whatever needed handling and that she would be safe in the meantime. Sheriff Tom Williams turned out to be a man in his late 50s with silver hair, kind eyes, and the sort of solid presence that suggested he'd seen most everything the world had to offer and remained unshakable in his core principles. He greeted Mike with the familiarity of someone who was both a friend and a respected member of the community, then turned his attention to Jessica with polite curiosity. "Tom, this is Jessica," Mike said simply. "She's been staying at Martha's motel, and she's got a situation that I think you need to hear about." Sheriff Williams gestured for them to sit in the chairs facing his desk, his manner patient and professional. "What kind of situation are we talking about?" Jessica looked at Mike, who nodded encouragingly, then took a deep breath and began her story again. This time, telling it felt slightly easier, perhaps because Mike's belief in her had given her confidence, or perhaps because Sheriff Williams listened with the kind of focused attention that suggested he took all reports seriously, regardless of how unusual they might sound. When she finished, Sheriff Williams was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful rather than skeptical. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and studied Jessica's face with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades learning to distinguish truth from deception. "Ms. Martinez," he said, and Jessica was struck by his use of her real name, the first time anyone had called her that since she'd fled Denver. "I have to ask the obvious question. Do you have any proof of what you've told me? Any evidence of this conversation you overheard, or documentation of threats against you?" "No," Jessica admitted. "I didn't record the conversation, and I haven't received any direct threats. I just heard David Chun discussing my murder with someone I didn't recognize." "And you're certain it was David Chun?" "Absolutely. I've worked with him for 8 years. I know his voice as well as I know my own." Sheriff Williams nodded slowly. "I'm familiar with TechVision Industries, at least by reputation. We've had some training on cybersecurity issues that involve your company's software. It's a significant enterprise." "Yes, it is," Jessica confirmed, wondering where he was going with this line of questioning. "Which means that if someone wanted to harm you, they'd have significant resources at their disposal," Sheriff Williams continued. "Corporate espionage, private investigators, maybe even people with law enforcement or military backgrounds." Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. She'd been thinking about David Chun as a colleague who had betrayed her, but Sheriff Williams was right to point out the broader implications. If David was willing to arrange her murder, he might have access to resources and connections she hadn't considered. The question, Sheriff Williams said, is what we do about it. You can't stay hidden forever, and we can't arrest someone based on a conversation you overheard without additional evidence. So what do you suggest? Mike asked. We need to gather more information, Sheriff Williams replied. Find out who David Chun has been talking to, what his motivations might be, whether there are others involved. And we need to do it in a way that doesn't put Jessica at additional risk. How do we do that? Jessica asked. Carefully, Sheriff Williams said with a slight smile. And with help from people who have experience in this kind of investigation. He picked up his phone and dialed a number, waiting while it rang. Jim? It's Tom Williams in Pine Valley. I've got a situation here that I think you might be interested in. Corporate fraud, possibly attempted murder, definitely above my pay grade. He paused, listening. Yeah, I think this one needs federal attention. Can you come up here tomorrow? Jessica felt her anxiety spike again at the mention of federal involvement. Who are you calling? Jim Morrison, FBI field agent based in Denver, Sheriff Williams explained, covering the phone with his hand. He's good people, honest as the day is long, and he specializes in corporate crime. If there's something to your story, he'll find it. And if there isn't, he'll tell us that too. The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Sheriff Williams providing basic details about Jessica's situation without revealing her location or current circumstances. When he hung up, he turned back to them with an expression that was both reassuring and serious. Agent Morrison will be here tomorrow afternoon, he said. In the meantime, I want you to stay close to town. Miss Martinez, don't go anywhere alone, and don't contact anyone from your previous life. If someone is really trying to kill you, we don't want to give them any opportunity to track you here. Jessica nodded, feeling both relieved and terrified by the rapid progression of events. 3 hours ago, she had been a woman running from shadows with no plan and no allies. Now she had people working on her behalf, investigating her situation, and taking concrete steps to address the threat. It was what she had hoped for, but it also made everything feel more real and immediate. Where should I stay? She asked. The motel is fine for now, but if this investigation takes time, you'll stay with us, Mike said quietly, and both Jessica and Sheriff Williams turned to look at him in surprise. Mike, Jessica began, I can't ask you to do that. If these people are as dangerous as we think they are. You're not asking, Mike interrupted. I'm offering. Emma and I have plenty of room, and it's better if you're not alone right now. Sheriff Williams nodded approvingly. That's not a bad idea. Mike's place is off the main road, and anyone looking for you would have to ask around town to find it. Word gets around pretty quickly here when strangers start asking questions. Jessica felt overwhelmed by the generosity of these people who barely knew her, but were willing to put themselves at risk on her behalf. In her world of corporate politics and calculated relationships, such uncomplicated kindness was almost incomprehensible. I don't know how to thank you, she said, looking between Mike and Sheriff Williams. You can thank us by staying alive long enough to testify against whoever's behind this, Sheriff Williams said pragmatically, and by trusting us to handle this the right way. They spent another hour at the sheriff's office, going over details of Jessica's story and discussing security precautions for the next few days. Sheriff Williams had experience with witness protection situations, though nothing quite as complex as Jessica's case, and he was methodical in his planning. By the time they left, Jessica felt like she was finally taking concrete steps to address her situation rather than simply running from it. Emma was asleep in the truck when they returned, her homework completed and her head resting against the window. Mike gently gathered her into his arms, and she stirred just enough to wrap her arms around his neck without fully waking. The trust and love in that simple gesture made Jessica's chest tight with emotion. Mike's house was a modest 2-story structure about 10 minutes outside of town, surrounded by pine trees and situated with a view of the mountains that took Jessica's breath away. It was the kind of place that looked like it had grown organically. From the landscape, built for comfort rather than display, with a wide front porch and windows that let in maximum natural light. "It's not fancy," Mike said as he carried Emma inside, "but it's home." Jessica followed them through a living room that was clearly designed around the needs of a family rather than entertaining guests. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator, and bookshelves held a mix of technical manuals and children's stories. Family photographs showed Mike, Emma, and a woman who must have been Emma's mother in happier times, camping trips and birthday parties, and ordinary moments that had been elevated to treasure status by loss. "The guest room is upstairs," Mike sighed, settling Emma onto the couch where she immediately curled into a ball and resumed sleeping. "It's not much, but the bed is comfortable and you'll have privacy." The guest room turned out to be a cheerful space with yellow walls and white furniture, clearly prepared with care for visitors. Jessica set her small bag on the dresser and looked out the window at the view of pine trees and distant peaks. After 3 days of cheap motels and sleeping in her car, it felt like luxury. When she came back downstairs, Mike had started dinner while Emma did homework at the kitchen table. The scene was so domestic, so normal, that Jessica felt like an intruder in their carefully constructed life. These people had found a way to build something beautiful from tragedy, and now she was bringing danger into their safe haven. "I should leave," she said suddenly, standing in the kitchen doorway. "This isn't fair to you and Emma. If something happens because of me—" "Nothing's going to happen," Mike said firmly, not looking up from the vegetables he was chopping. "And even if it did, some things are worth the risk." "Like what?" Mike paused in his work and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Like doing the right thing, like helping someone who needs it, like teaching my daughter that we don't turn our backs on people just because it might be inconvenient or dangerous." Emma looked up from her homework, apparently having been listening to the conversation. "Are you in trouble, Jessica?" Jessica exchanged a glance with Mike, unsure how much they should tell the child. Mike nodded slightly, giving her permission to be honest within reason. "Yes, sweetheart, I am in some trouble," Jessica said, sitting down at the table across from Emma. "Some people might want to hurt me, and your daddy is helping me figure out how to stay safe." Emma considered this with the seriousness that children brought to important adult conversations. "Is that why Sheriff Williams came to talk to us at the park?" "How did you know the sheriff came to talk to us?" Mike asked, surprised. "I saw his car when I was looking for leaves," Emma said matter-of-factly. "He drives the one with the lights on top." "Are the people who want to hurt Jessica bad people?" "Yes," Mike said simply. "They are bad people. But Sheriff Williams is a good person, and so is the FBI agent who's coming to help tomorrow. We're going to make sure Jessica stays safe." Emma nodded as if this explanation satisfied her completely. "Good. I like Jessica. She listened to my stories about Mama and didn't look sad or weird like some grown-ups do." Jessica felt tears threatening again at the child's simple acceptance of her presence in their lives. When was the last time someone had liked her for something as basic as listening to their stories? When had she last been valued for her capacity for human connection, rather than her business acumen or financial resources? Dinner was a simple affair of grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and rice, but it was prepared with care and served in an atmosphere of warmth that made every bite taste better than the expensive meals Jessica was accustomed to. Emma chattered about her day at school, sharing details about friends and teachers and playground dramas with the enthusiasm of someone who felt completely secure in her audience's attention. As they ate, Jessica found herself relaxing for the first time in days. The constant hypervigilance that had been her companion since fleeing Denver began to ease in the face of such determined normalcy. Mike and Emma had created a sanctuary here, A place where love and routine provided protection against the chaos of the outside world. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Jessica her room, which turned out to be a wonderful explosion of color and creativity. The walls were covered with her artwork, ranging from careful still lifes to wild abstract expressions that captured the energy of childhood imagination. A bookshelf held dozens of volumes, everything from picture books to chapter books that seemed advanced for her age. "Daddy reads to me every night," Emma explained, settling onto her bed with a book in her hands. "Even when I can read by myself, he still does the voices for all the characters." Jessica looked at the book Emma had chosen, a story about a brave girl who went on adventures to help people in need. It seemed fitting somehow, this tale of courage and compassion selected by a child who was showing both qualities in her acceptance of Jessica's presence in their home. "Would you like me to read with you tonight?" Jessica asked, surprising herself with the offer. Emma's face lit up with delight. "Would you? We could take turns doing the voices." They spent the next hour immersed in the story, with Jessica taking on the role of the wise grandmother character, while Emma voiced the brave protagonist. It was the first time in years that Jessica had engaged in an activity that had no purpose beyond simple enjoyment, no agenda beyond the pleasure of sharing a story with someone who appreciated it. As Emma drifted off to sleep, Jessica found herself standing in the hallway outside the child's room, overwhelmed by the realization of what she had been missing in her relentless pursuit of professional success. The warmth of family, the security of belonging somewhere, the simple joy of connecting with another person without calculation or strategy. These were treasures she had traded away without ever understanding their true value. Mike appeared beside her in the hallway, moving quietly to avoid waking Emma. "She likes you," he said softly. "It usually takes her longer to warm up to new people." "She's amazing," Jessica replied, meaning it completely. "You've done an incredible job raising her." "Most days I feel like I'm just trying not to mess her up too badly," Mike admitted. "But she makes it easier. Kids have a way of keeping you focused on what really matters." They made their way downstairs to the living room, where Mike built a fire in the stone fireplace while Jessica settled into a comfortable chair with a cup of tea. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the crackling of burning wood provided a soothing soundtrack to the comfortable silence that settled between them. "Can I ask you something?" Jessica said eventually. "Of course. Why are you doing this, really? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything, and helping me could put you and Emma in real danger. So why?" Mike was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire as if the flames could provide the answer to her question. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful and deliberate. "When Sarah was dying," he said slowly, "we were living in Phoenix. Big city, lots of people, but somehow we felt completely alone. The medical bills were crushing us. I was trying to work and take care of Emma and be with Sarah as much as possible, and I was falling apart." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee before continuing. "One day, I was in the hospital cafeteria, trying to choke down a sandwich while Emma napped in Sarah's room. I must have looked like hell because this woman, a complete stranger, sat down across from me and asked if I was okay." Jessica waited, sensing that this story was important to understanding who Mike was and why he had chosen to help her. Her name was Margaret, and her husband was in the ICU with a heart attack. She had been where I was, caring for someone she loved while trying to hold everything else together. We talked for maybe 20 minutes, and she gave me some practical advice about dealing with insurance companies and finding support services. Nothing dramatic, just one person helping another get through a difficult time. Mike looked at Jessica directly, his eyes reflecting the firelight. That conversation probably saved my sanity. Not because she solved all my problems, but because she reminded me that I wasn't alone, that there were still good people in the world who cared about strangers. When Sarah died and Emma and I moved here, I promised myself that I would try to be that person for someone else if I ever got the chance. Jessica felt tears sliding down her cheeks as she understood the deeper meaning of Mike's kindness. He wasn't helping her because he had nothing to lose or because he was naive about the dangers involved. He was helping her because someone had once helped him, and he believed in paying that kindness forward. I'm not usually the kind of person who inspires that kind of generosity, Jessica said quietly. In my world, everything is transactional. People help each other because they expect something in return. Maybe that's one of the problems with your world, Mike suggested gently. Maybe that's part of what you've been running from, even before someone tried to kill you. His words hit closer to the truth than Jessica was comfortable acknowledging. She had been running from more than just physical danger. She had been running from a life that had become hollow and meaningless. From relationships that were based on utility rather than affection. From a version of herself that she no longer recognized or respected. I don't know how to be different, she admitted. I've been Jessica Martinez, CEO, for so long that I'm not sure there's anything else left. There is, Mike said with quiet certainty. I've seen glimpses of it today. The way you listened to Emma's stories, the way you read with her tonight, the way you're sitting here worrying about putting us in danger instead of just accepting our help. The person you used to be is still there. She's just been buried under years of corporate armor. Outside, the wind picked up, sending pine boughs scratching against the windows and reminding Jessica of the storm that had brought her to this place. Tomorrow the FBI agent would arrive, and her story would become part of an official investigation. There would be questions and procedures and legal complications that would force her back into the world she had been fleeing. But tonight, sitting by the fire in this warm house with a man who had chosen to help her and a child who had accepted her presence without question, Jessica allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to build a different kind of life. A life based on connection rather than competition, on love rather than achievement, on being valued for who she was rather than what she could produce. It was a dangerous dream, perhaps more dangerous than the corporate killers who were hunting her. Because once you allowed yourself to want something real, something meaningful, the cost of losing it became almost unbearable. But as the fire burned lower and the house settled into peaceful quiet around them, Jessica decided that some dreams were worth the risk. FBI Agent Jim Morrison arrived in Pine Valley the next afternoon driving an unremarkable sedan that could have belonged to any traveling salesman or insurance adjuster. He was a man in his early 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of understated confidence that came from years of dealing with complex criminal cases. When Sheriff Williams introduced him to Jessica and Mike in the conference room behind the sheriff's office, his handshake was firm and his attention completely focused. Ms. Martinez, Agent Morrison said, settling into his chair with a briefcase that he opened with practiced efficiency. I've spent the morning reviewing what little information we have about your situation, and I have to say, it's intriguing. TechVision Industries has been on our radar for some time, though not for the reasons you might expect. Jessica felt a chill of apprehension. What do you mean? We've been investigating some irregularities in government contracts, specifically regarding security clearances and access to classified systems. Nothing that directly implicates you, but your company has been involved in some projects that have raised questions. Agent Morrison pulled out a tablet and swiped through several screens of data. David Chun, your CTO, has been particularly interesting to us. He's been meeting regularly with individuals who have connections to foreign intelligence services. Nothing we could prove was illegal, but enough to make us curious. The revelation hit Jessica like a physical blow. Foreign intelligence? Are you saying David is selling corporate secrets? I'm saying David Chen is involved in activities that go beyond simple corporate betrayal, Agent Morrison replied carefully. If he wants you dead, it might not be about company succession or stock options. It might be about preventing you from discovering something that could expose a much larger operation. Mike leaned forward in his chair. What kind of operation? The kind where a billionaire, CEO, asking the wrong questions or noticing the wrong patterns could bring down a network that's been years in the making. Agent Morrison said grimly. Industrial espionage, technology theft, possibly even state-sponsored cyber warfare. Jessica felt the room spinning around her as the implications sank in. She had thought she was dealing with corporate politics and personal betrayal. But Agent Morrison was describing something far more dangerous and complex. So what do we do? She asked, her voice barely steady. We set a trap, Agent Morrison said simply. We use you as bait to draw out not just David Chun, but his entire network. And we do it in a way that ensures your safety while gathering enough evidence to prosecute everyone involved. Sheriff Williams shifted uncomfortably in his chair. That sounds extremely dangerous. It is, Agent Morrison acknowledged. But it's also the only way to end this permanently. Ms. Martinez can't spend the rest of her life hiding in small mountain towns, no matter how welcoming they might be. Over the next 2 hours, Agent Morrison outlined a plan that was both elegant and terrifying in its complexity. Jessica would return to Denver under FBI protection, ostensibly to resume control of TechVision Industries. But instead of simply returning to her old life, she would be wearing recording devices and following carefully scripted interactions designed to expose David Chun and his co-conspirators. The key, Agent Morrison explained, is making David believe that you don't suspect him. You'll act like someone who's been hiding because of general paranoia, not because you overheard his specific conversation. We want him to feel confident enough to make his next move. And what if his next move is to have me killed before you can gather enough evidence? Jessica asked. That's why you'll have protection, Agent Morrison assured her. Round-the-clock surveillance, backup agents positioned at every location, and extraction protocols if things go wrong. You won't be alone. Despite the reassurances, Jessica felt terror clawing at her chest. The plan made logical sense, but it required her to walk back into the lion's den and pretend she didn't know the lions were hungry. Mike had been quiet throughout most of the briefing, but now he spoke up. What about afterward? Assuming this works and you arrest everyone involved, what happens to Jessica then? Agent Morrison looked between Mike and Jessica with the perceptive gaze of someone who had learned to read the undercurrents in human relationships. That depends on what Ms. Martinez wants to happen. She could resume her position at TechVision, sell the company, or walk away entirely. Once the threat is eliminated, her choices are her own. That evening, back at Mike's house, Jessica sat on the front porch watching Emma chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. The little girl's laughter filled the air, a sound of pure joy that seemed to exist in a different universe from the world of espionage and corporate crime that Jessica was about to re-enter. You're scared, Mike observed, settling into the chair beside her with 2 cups of coffee. Terrified, Jessica corrected. In 2 days, I'll be back in Denver pretending that I don't know someone wants me dead, trying to trick them into revealing themselves while hoping the FBI can keep me alive long enough to testify. Mike nodded thoughtfully. But you're going to do it anyway. I have to. Agent Morrison is right. I can't hide forever. And if David is really involved in something as serious as foreign espionage, then stopping him is about more than just my personal safety. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Emma's determined pursuit of the elusive fireflies. The mountains rose around them like protective walls, and the evening air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke from someone's fireplace. I keep thinking about what you said last night, Jessica said suddenly. About the person I used to be still being there, just buried under corporate armor. What about it? I'm not sure I want to go back to being Jessica Martinez, CEO, even if I survive this. That woman was successful, but she was also empty. She built an empire but lost herself in the process. Mike turned to look at her, his expression gentle but serious. "So who do you want to be instead?" Jessica considered the question, thinking about the past few days and how they had changed her perspective on what mattered in life. "I want to be someone who builds things that bring people together instead of driving them apart. Someone who measures success by the relationship she maintains rather than the profits she generates. Someone who would stop to help a stranger change a tire without calculating what she might gain from the interaction." "That sounds like someone worth becoming," Mike said quietly. Emma came running up to the porch, slightly out of breath and glowing with excitement. "I caught 3 fireflies," she announced proudly, holding up a mason jar that flickered with captured light. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mike said, admiring her handiwork. "But remember what we talked about?" Emma nodded solemnly and carried the jar to the edge of the porch, where she carefully unscrewed the lid and tipped it toward the ground. The fireflies emerged slowly, blinking in confusion before taking flight again into the darkening sky. "Why did you let them go?" Jessica asked, genuinely curious about the child's reasoning. "Because catching them is fun, but keeping them would make them sad," Emma explained with the matter-of-fact wisdom that children sometimes possessed. "Daddy says the best way to love something is to let it be free to be what it's supposed to be." The simple statement hit Jessica with unexpected force. How many times in her corporate life had she tried to capture and control things that were meant to be free? How many relationships had she damaged by treating people like assets to be managed, rather than individuals to be respected? 2 days later, Jessica found herself back in Denver, riding in an FBI surveillance vehicle toward the TechVision headquarters. She was wearing clothing provided by the Bureau, garments that looked identical to her usual business attire, but contained sophisticated recording and tracking devices. Agent Morrison sat beside her, reviewing final details of their plan. "Remember," he said, "your story is simple. You've been suffering from stress and anxiety, took some time away to clear your head, and now you're ready to resume your responsibilities. You're concerned about the company's performance in your absence, but you don't suspect any specific wrongdoing." Jessica nodded, though her hands were shaking slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. Through the tinted windows of the vehicle, she could see the familiar skyline of downtown Denver, the glass and steel towers that had once represented her domain, but now felt like foreign territory. The TechVision building rose 30 stories above the city, its facade of black glass and chrome reflecting the morning sun like a dark mirror. Jessica had been proud of this building once, seeing it as a symbol of everything she had accomplished. Now it looked like a fortress designed to keep secrets rather than foster innovation. David Chun was waiting in the executive conference room when Jessica arrived, flanked by several other senior managers whose expressions ranged from relief to barely concealed hostility. David himself looked exactly as he always had, professionally, groomed and radiating the kind of calm competence that had made Jessica trust him completely. It was jarring to see him sitting there as if nothing had changed when she now knew he had been planning her murder. "Jessica," David said, standing to greet her with what appeared to be genuine warmth. "Thank God you're all right. We've been worried sick." Jessica forced herself to accept his embrace, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to recoil from his touch. "I'm sorry for disappearing like that, David. I just needed some time to think." "Of course you did," David said smoothly. "The pressure you've been under, the responsibility of running a company this size, it's understandable that you'd need a break." Over the next several hours, Jessica played her part perfectly, allowing David and the other executives to brief her on developments during her absence while the FBI recording devices captured every word. She asked the right questions, expressed appropriate concerns, and gave no indication that she suspected anything beyond normal corporate challenges. But as the day progressed, Jessica began to notice things she had missed before. Conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. Computer screens that were hastily minimized when she approached. Glances between David and certain other employees that suggested shared secrets and hidden agendas. The trap was working. David's confidence was growing, and he was beginning to reveal details about projects and partnerships that Jessica had never authorized. Foreign consulting contracts that made no business sense. Technology transfers that seemed designed to benefit competitors rather than TechVision. Security protocols that gave David access to systems that should have been off limits to everyone except Jessica herself. By the end of the week, Agent Morrison had enough evidence to begin making arrests. The operation expanded beyond David Chun to include a network of corporate spies, foreign agents, and corrupt government officials who had been using TechVision as a pipeline for stealing American technology secrets. Jessica's near murder had been just one small piece of a much larger puzzle involving national security and international espionage. When it was over, when the arrests had been made and the immediate danger had passed, Jessica found herself sitting in her executive office, looking out at the city she had once thought she owned. TechVision would survive the scandal, though it would take time to rebuild trust with customers and partners. David's conspiracy had been sophisticated, but not comprehensive, and the company's core technologies and client relationships remained intact. Agent Morrison knocked on her office door, entering when she called for him to come in. "It's finished," he said simply. "David Chun and his associates are in federal custody, and we've shut down their entire operation. You're safe now, Ms. Martinez." Jessica nodded, feeling oddly empty despite the relief she should have been experiencing. "What happens next?" "That's up to you," Agent Morrison replied. "You can resume running TechVision, you can sell it, or you can walk away entirely. The choice is yours." That night, Jessica called Mike from her penthouse apartment, the first time she had spoken to him since returning to Denver. Just hearing his voice made her realize how much she had missed not just him and Emma, but the life they represented. "How did it go?" Mike asked, though Agent Morrison had already briefed him on the basic details. "It's over," Jessica said. "David and his network are in custody, and I'm safe. The FBI says I can go back to my normal life now." "That's wonderful news," Mike said, and she could hear the genuine relief in his voice. "Emma will be so excited to hear that you're okay." Jessica found herself crying at the mention of the little girl, who had accepted her so completely and asked for nothing in return except honest attention to her stories and drawings. "Mike," she said through her tears, "I don't want to go back to my normal life. I want to build something different, something better. And I want to do it with people who care about more than quarterly earnings and market share." There was a long pause before Mike responded. "What did you have in mind?" Jessica wiped her eyes and looked out at the city lights spread below her apartment. "I'm going to sell TechVision," she said, the decision crystallizing as she spoke. "And I'm going to use the money to start something new. Something that brings technology to underserved communities, that helps people instead of just generating profits." "That sounds like a worthy goal," Mike said carefully. "But where were you thinking of doing this?" Jessica smiled for the first time in days. "I was thinking Pine Valley might be a good place to start. It's a community that understands the value of helping people, and it has excellent local support for anyone who might need help changing a tire." Mike's laughter carried clearly through the phone. "I think Pine Valley would welcome that kind of investment. And I think Emma would be very excited to have you back. What about you?" Jessica asked, her heart pounding as she waited for his answer. "I think," Mike said slowly, "that I'd like to see what the future holds for Jessica Martinez, community builder, as opposed to Jessica Martinez, corporate CEO." 6 months later, Jessica stood in the renovated storefront that housed the Pine Valley Technology Center, watching Mike install the last of the computer workstations that would provide internet access and digital literacy training to anyone in the community who needed it. Emma sat nearby, carefully organizing the children's programming books that would be used for the coding classes Jessica planned to teach. The center was funded by the sale of TechVision Industries, though Jessica had retained enough stock to ensure she would always have the resources to support projects like this one. She had also kept the core patents for the security software that had made her company valuable, licensing them to other firms while maintaining control over how the technology was used. It was a different kind of success than what she had achieved before, measured not in dollars, but in the number of people who gained new skills, the students who discovered interests they never knew they had, the elderly residents who learned to video chat with distant grandchildren. The work was challenging but fulfilling in ways that corporate empire building had never been. Mike had proposed 3 months after she moved to Pine Valley permanently, presenting her with a ring he had designed himself and crafted in the workshop behind his auto repair shop. It was a simple band set with a small diamond, beautiful not because of its monetary value, but because of the love and intention that had gone into creating it. Emma had been their best advocate throughout their courtship, frequently pointing out how much happier both her father and Jessica seemed when they were together, and lobbying enthusiastically for Jessica to become her official stepmother. The wedding was planned for the fall, a small ceremony in the park by the river where Jessica had first begun to believe that a different kind of life was possible. As Jessica watched Mike work, admiring the competent way he approached every task and the patient manner in which he answered Emma's endless questions about electronics and programming, she thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. The corporate assassination plot that had driven her from Denver had been terrifying, but it had also been the catalyst for the most important transformation of her life. She had lost an empire but gained a family. She had given up power but found purpose. She had stopped running from danger and started running toward the things that truly mattered: love, community, and the satisfaction that came from using your abilities to make other people's lives better. "Are you ready for the grand opening?" Mike asked, stepping back to admire his handiwork. Jessica looked around the bright, welcoming space they had created together, filled with technology that would serve the community rather than simply generating profits. Tomorrow they would open the doors to anyone who wanted to learn, to explore, to discover new possibilities for their future. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it completely. Outside, the mountains rose against a brilliant blue sky, eternal and protective, surrounding the small community that had taught her the difference between success and significance. Pine Valley had given her more than safety from corporate assassins. It had given her a chance to become the person she was always meant to be. Emma ran over and grabbed both of their hands, pulling them toward the window to look at something that had caught her attention in the street. "Look," she said excitedly, "Mrs. Patterson brought her whole class to see our center." Jessica squeezed Emma's hand and smiled at the group of curious children pressing their noses against the glass, eager to explore the new opportunities that awaited them. This was what real success looked like, not the accumulation of wealth or power, but the creation of something that would outlast you, something that made the world a little better for the people who came after. As the three of them stood together, watching the children's excited faces, Jessica realized that she had finally found what she had been searching for all her life without even knowing it. Not achievement or recognition or financial security, but belonging, home, family, the kind of love that didn't need to be earned or maintained through performance, but simply existed as a gift freely given and gratefully received. The technology center would officially open tomorrow, but Jessica's new life had already begun. It was a life built on connection rather than competition, on service rather than accumulation, on the simple truth that the best way to find yourself was to lose yourself in something larger than your own ambitions. Mike squeezed her other hand and smiled at her with the expression of someone who had found his own second chance at happiness and wasn't taking a moment of it for granted. Together, they had built something beautiful from the wreckage of their separate losses, proving that sometimes the best endings were actually new beginnings in disguise. The future stretched ahead of them like an open road, full of possibilities and adventures yet to be discovered. And Jessica Martinez, former CEO, current community builder, and future wife and stepmother, was ready for all of it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.